Top of the hour now, you're watching a special New Year's Day edition of CNN Newsroom. I'm John Avlon in New York. And we begin with a message today from the Senate to the President. The Senate voting to override President Trump's veto of a mammoth defense spending bill. Let's go to CNN's Phil Mattingly for more. Phil, a pretty remarkable last hour. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, and it wasn't even close. Let's first talk about the policy, right? And I think it underscores why this was a fight that the president probably never should have picked to begin with. This is the National Defense Authorization Act. It is essentially the central defense policy bill as outlined by legislators. And for the last 60 years, it has been passed by Congress with usually pretty wide bipartisan margins.
So I need to tell you about what just happened on Capitol Hill, because this is genuinely unprecedented. Like, I've been covering politics for a while now, and I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like what went down on Monday. We're talking about senators, Republican senators, literally walking out of the chamber in the middle of proceedings. We're talking about Capitol Police scrambling to figure out what's happening. We're talking about heightened security measures being implemented because nobody knew if this was a protest or a confrontation or something even more serious. The whole building was in chaos. Staff members were confused. Reporters were chasing senators down hallways trying to get answers. And the message coming through loud and clear from everyone involved was simple. Trump has lost control. His grip on the Republican Party is slipping. And the people who are supposed to be his allies in the Senate are done pretending that everything is fine. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
That is a blunt and accurate way to put things, I guess. Look, everybody's eyes right now are on January 6th, right? That is when the United States Congress will convene for a joint session and they will count the electors. And John, you know this very, very well. This is traditionally every 4 years a rather pro forma thing. Everybody acknowledges what has occurred. This year is different because a lot of people, at least publicly, on the Republican side of the aisle, are not acknowledging the reality that Joe Biden is the president-elect and Joe Biden will be inaugurated as the 46th president of the United States on January 20th. Here's where things stand right now. The House Republicans, more than 140, and that number is likely to grow, I'm told, say they are going to object to at least one slate of electors, perhaps even more. What is necessary for this to actually have any tangible effect or action on the day is for a senator to join them. And we now know Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri will join in at least one objection. He hasn't laid out his exact plans yet. Now, what does this actually mean? And I think this is important to state. In terms of who will be the next president of the United States, it means absolutely nothing. In terms of January 6th, it means it's going to be a very long day. So basically, if you have an objection from a House member and from a Senate member and they pair up, both chambers of Congress then recess, then they have a 2-hour debate, maximum 2-hour debate, and then they vote on that objection. Democrats control the House. A number of Republicans in the Senate have made clear, even though they control the chamber, they believe Joe Biden is the president-elect of the United States. Both of those votes in both chambers will fail, no matter how many objections there are, no matter how many votes that it leads to. The most interesting element of everything that's going on right now is this has basically sparked a civil war inside the Republican Party, particularly in the United States Senate, where there are a number of Republican senators, particularly those up in 2022, who are saying, I don't want to have to take a vote against reality. Joe Biden is the next president of the United States, or President Trump, who obviously still commands quite a following in the Republican base.
It's a stunning thing we're going to confront, but what you said is so important. This essentially means a 2-hour debate. It does not change the outcome, but there are huge implications for the state of our democracy as well as the Republican Party. Phil Mattingly, thank you very much, my friend, and Happy New Year. All right. Joining me now, New York Magazine's Olivia Nuzzi and staff writer for The Atlantic, McKay Coppins, two of the great chroniclers of the Trump era. McKay, we'll start with you. Last hour, the Senate override the president's veto to the National Defense Authorization Act. Quite a smackdown on the way out the door. What do you think the reaction will be inside the White House?
Come on. Are you kidding me right now? This is the president of the United States we're talking about. The guy who was supposed to have total command over the Republican Party. The guy who crushed his opponents in the primaries and won back the White House. The guy who everyone said had transformed the GOP into his personal political vehicle. And now, less than a year into his second term, senators from his own party are staging walkouts and refusing to play along with his agenda. This is not what winning looks like. This is not what dominance looks like. This is what collapse looks like. This is what happens when you push people too far and burn too many bridges and create too much chaos for too long. Eventually, even your most loyal supporters start looking for the exits. And that's exactly what we saw on Monday. The walkout was sparked by outrage over a secret deal that came to light involving the government shutdown. You remember the shutdown, right? 43 days, the longest in American history. Federal workers going without pay. National parks falling apart. Food stamp recipients wondering if they'd be able to feed their families. It was a disaster by every possible measure. And throughout the entire thing, Trump refused to compromise. He dug in. He said he wasn't going to budge. He said the Democrats were to blame. And he was willing to let the government stay closed indefinitely until he got what he wanted. Well, it turns out there was more to the story. It turns out there were backroom negotiations happening that certain senators weren't told about. It turns out deals were being made in secret while these senators were out there defending Trump's position and taking political heat for a shutdown that was causing real pain to real people. And when the details of those secret negotiations came out, when senators realized they had been kept in the dark while the White House was cutting deals behind their backs, they lost it. Absolutely lost it. The anger on the Senate floor was palpable. You could see it in their faces. You could hear it in their voices. These are people who put their reputations on the line for Trump. People who went on cable news and defended him. People who took heat from their constituents and their families and their colleagues for standing by the president during a crisis he created. And now they find out they were being played, that the White House was negotiating in secret while they were out there taking bullets. Yeah, that's going to cause some problems. That's going to create some serious trust issues. The walkout itself was dramatic. Multiple Republican senators got up from their seats and left the chamber in the middle of proceedings. Some of them were visibly angry. Some of them refused to speak to reporters. Some of them made statements that were clearly designed to send a message to the White House. This is not normal behavior. Senators don't just walk out of the chamber. There are procedures. There are traditions. There are expectations about how you conduct yourself as a member of the world's greatest deliberative body. And for multiple members of the president's own party to just get up and leave in the middle of official business, that's a statement. That's a declaration. That's saying, we're done playing along with this circus. Capitol Police had to implement heightened security measures because nobody was quite sure what was happening. When you have a bunch of senators suddenly leaving the chamber in an apparent coordinated action, you don't know if it's political theater, or if there's some kind of threat, or if the situation might escalate. Security personnel were deployed throughout the building. Access was restricted in certain areas. It was tense. It was chaotic. And it was all happening because Trump's own party members have had enough. They're tired of the drama. They're tired of the chaos. They're tired of being kept in the dark and used as props for whatever scheme the White House is cooking up at any given moment. And the polling numbers tell the story of why this is happening now. Trump's approval rating is absolutely tanking among senators, among the public, among everyone who matters politically. Only about 30% of Americans are blaming Democrats for the current government dysfunction. 30%. That means 70% are either blaming Republicans or blaming both parties equally. And when you're the president, when you're the leader of your party, that blame falls on you. You own it. You can't escape it. Every senator who's up for re-election in 2026 is looking at those numbers and doing the math. They're calculating whether standing by Trump is going to help them or hurt them. And increasingly, the math is not working out in Trump's favor. So what exactly happened? How did we get to this point? And what does it mean for the next 2 years of Trump's presidency? Well, let me break it all down for you. Because this is about way more than one walkout on one day. This is about the fundamental collapse of Trump's coalition in the Senate. This is about the consequences of 43 days of shutdown chaos. And this is about a president who has pushed his own party to the breaking point and is now watching them break. Stick with me, because this story is just getting started. Okay, so let's dig into what actually happened here, because the surface level story, senators walked out, doesn't really capture the full picture of how significant this moment is. We need to understand the context. We need to understand the relationships. We need to understand why Republican senators who have stood by Trump through everything, through 2 impeachments, through criminal indictments, through the Epstein file disaster, are suddenly deciding that now is the time to break ranks. Because this didn't happen in a vacuum. This is the culmination of months of frustration and broken trust and accumulating grievances that finally boiled over into open revolt. Let's start with the shutdown, because that's really where this all begins. 43 days, the longest government shutdown in American history. It started because Trump demanded funding for his policy priorities and refused to sign any spending bill that didn't include exactly what he wanted. Democrats controlled the Senate by a narrow margin at the start of the year, but after some special elections and party switches, Republicans now have the slimmest possible majority. And Trump thought that meant he could bulldoze through whatever he wanted. He thought he could just refuse to compromise and eventually Democrats would cave. But that's not what happened. Democrats held firm. The shutdown dragged on, and the political damage started piling up faster than anyone expected. Federal workers went weeks without paychecks. Some of them started missing mortgage payments. Some of them couldn't afford childcare. Some of them had to take second jobs just to keep the lights on while waiting for the government to reopen. Food stamp recipients, millions of them, faced uncertainty about whether their benefits would continue. The FDA had to scale back food inspections. The TSA was dealing with sickouts as workers who weren't getting paid decided they couldn't afford to keep showing up. National parks were trashed because there was no staff to maintain them. The Smithsonian museums closed. The National Zoo closed. The panda cams went dark. It was chaos on every level. And through all of it, Republican senators were out there defending Trump, going on Fox News and saying the shutdown was necessary, going on talk radio and blaming Democrats, taking heat from their constituents who were suffering real consequences. These senators put their political capital on the line because they believed Trump was fighting for something important. They believed the White House had a strategy. They believed that if they just held firm long enough, they would get a deal that made all the pain worthwhile. But here's what they didn't know. While they were out there taking fire, the White House was conducting secret negotiations that they weren't told about. The details of these secret deals started coming out in the days after the shutdown ended, and the picture that emerged was not flattering to the White House. It turns out that while Trump was publicly insisting he would never compromise, his team was quietly exploring various off-ramps with Democratic leadership. There were discussions about face-saving measures. There were conversations about what concessions might be acceptable. There were trial balloons being floated through back channels, and none of this was being shared with the Republican senators who were supposed to be part of the strategy. They were being used as props. They were being kept in the dark deliberately, and when they found out, they were furious. The walkout on Monday was the explosive result of that fury. Multiple senators, and we're talking about people who have been reliable Trump allies, decided they weren't going to sit there and pretend everything was normal anymore. They weren't going to participate in proceedings as if the White House hadn't just betrayed their trust. They weren't going to play along with the fiction that the Republican Party is unified behind this president. So they got up and they left, in the middle of official business, in full view of the cameras and the press gallery, sending a message that couldn't possibly be misunderstood. The chaos that followed was immediate and intense. Capitol Police weren't sure what was happening. When you have multiple senators leaving the chamber in what appears to be a coordinated action, you have to treat it as a potential security situation until you know otherwise. Access points were monitored more closely. Staff were asked to stay in certain areas. Reporters were trying to chase down the departing senators to get statements. It was bedlam. And the images coming out of the Capitol. Senators storming through hallways with angry expressions. Security personnel scrambling to keep up. Confused staffers trying to figure out what was going on. Those images told a story of a government in crisis. A party in disarray. A president who has lost the ability to keep his own people in line. Now, the White House is trying to spin this as a minor disagreement, a temporary frustration that will blow over. They're saying the senators are overreacting. They're saying the secret negotiations were just normal diplomacy. They're saying everything is fine and the party will come together when it matters. But that spin is falling flat because everyone can see what's really happening. Everyone can see the cracks forming. Everyone can see that Trump's grip on power is weaker than it's been at any point since he came back to office. The polling data backs this up completely. Trump's approval rating has been in free fall since the shutdown started, and it hasn't recovered even now that the government is back open. The damage is done. People remember the chaos. They remember the federal workers struggling to pay bills. They remember the national parks being trashed, and they blame Trump for it. Only about 30% of Americans are putting the blame on Democrats. That's a stunning number. That means Trump lost the messaging war decisively. He thought he could hold out, and eventually public opinion would turn against Democrats. Instead, public opinion turned against him. And here's what really matters for the senators who walked out. They're looking at 2026. They're looking at their own re-election campaigns. They're looking at the political landscape and doing the math. And what the math shows is that being associated with Trump right now is a liability, not an asset. The shutdown hurt Republicans across the board. The off-year elections in November were brutal. Democrats won in places they weren't supposed to win. Exit polls show voters were angry about the chaos and the dysfunction and the inability of Washington to just keep the government running. And that anger landed squarely on the party in power, on Republicans, on Trump. So when these senators found out They had been kept in the dark during the shutdown negotiations. That was the last straw. It was bad enough to take political damage for Trump's strategy, but to take that damage while Trump's team was secretly exploring compromises behind their backs, that's a betrayal. That's being treated like pawns instead of partners. And senators, especially senators who have been in Washington for a while, don't like being treated that way. They have egos. They have pride. They have a sense of their own importance. And when you make them look foolish, when you use them and discard them, they remember, and eventually they act. The implications of this moment extend far beyond one dramatic walkout. We're seeing the beginning of what could be a fundamental realignment within the Republican Party. Trump has maintained his dominance through a combination of loyalty from the base and fear among elected officials. Nobody wanted to cross him because they were afraid of being primaried, afraid of angry tweets, afraid of becoming a target for Trump's loyal followers. But that fear only works if Trump is strong, if he's popular, if crossing him seems politically suicidal. And right now, Trump is not strong. His approval is tanking. His handling of the shutdown was a disaster. His management of the Epstein files has been even worse. The DC prosecution is moving forward with damaging evidence. Democrats are pushing another impeachment. The Supreme Court is hearing challenges to his power grabs. Everything is going wrong at once. And when everything goes wrong, when the aura of invincibility starts to fade, that's when people start getting brave. That's when they start thinking, maybe I don't have to be afraid of this guy anymore. Maybe crossing him won't destroy my career after all. Maybe the voters in my state are more tired of the drama than they are loyal to Trump. That calculus is shifting, and the walkout on Monday was evidence of that shift. Senators who would never have dreamed of publicly embarrassing Trump a year ago are now walking out of the chamber in protest. That's new, that's significant, and it's only going to accelerate as Trump's numbers continue to decline. All right, so let's break this down into the key takeaways, because there's a lot happening here, and it's important to understand what this means for the bigger picture. We're not just talking about some senators getting mad and walking out of a room. We're talking about a potential inflection point in Trump's presidency. We're talking about the moment when the cracks became too obvious to ignore. And we're talking about what comes next, as the Republican Party tries to figure out whether it's still the party of Trump or whether it's time to start looking for alternatives. First key point. The walkout represents a genuine fracture in Trump's Senate coalition. These aren't random backbenchers making noise for attention. These are senators who have been reliable Trump allies, people who voted with him, people who defended him on television, people who took political risks to support his agenda. And they're done, at least for now. They've made it clear that they don't trust the White House anymore. They've made it clear that being kept in the dark during the shutdown negotiations was a betrayal. They can't just forget. This isn't something that gets fixed with a phone call or a round of golf. This is real damage to real relationships. And it's going to affect Trump's ability to get things done in the Senate for the rest of his term. Second key point. The timing of this collapse is devastating for Trump's legislative agenda. He has big plans for the next 2 years. Tax cuts, deregulation, immigration crackdowns, all of it requires Senate cooperation. All of it requires Republicans to vote together as a bloc. And right now, Republicans are not voting together. They're fighting with each other. They're walking out of chambers. They're giving interviews expressing frustration with White House leadership. This is not an environment where major legislation gets passed. This is an environment where everything grinds to a halt, where even simple procedural votes become battlegrounds, where Trump's priorities get stuck in the mud while his own party tears itself apart. Third key point. The polling numbers explain why senators are willing to break with Trump now. When a president is popular, when his approval ratings are high, elected officials in his party fall in line. They're afraid of the political consequences of crossing him. But when a president's numbers crater, when only 30% of the public blames the other side for government dysfunction, the calculus changes completely. Suddenly, being associated with this president isn't an asset anymore. It's a liability. Suddenly, those senators who are up for re-election in 2026 start thinking about their own survival. They start wondering if maybe some distance from Trump might actually help them back home. And that's exactly what we're seeing play out. Fourth key point. The secret negotiations during the shutdown were a massive unforced error by the White House. Politics is about relationships. It's about trust. It's about making people feel like they're part of the team. And when you conduct secret negotiations while your allies are out there taking fire for you, you're telling them they're not really part of the team. You're telling them they're expendable. You're telling them their sacrifice doesn't actually matter because you're going to do whatever you want behind their backs anyway. That's a terrible way to maintain a coalition. That's a guaranteed way to create resentment and distrust. And now Trump is paying the price for that approach. Fifth key point. The walkout creates problems that extend beyond the immediate moment. Even if things calm down, even if senators eventually return to normal proceedings, The images from Monday are going to live forever. Democrats are going to use them in campaign ads. They're going to run clips of Republican senators storming out of the chamber with angry faces. They're going to use those images to tell a story about a party in chaos, a president who can't even keep his own people in line, a government that's falling apart under Republican leadership. Those are powerful images. Those are the kinds of images that stick in voters' minds, and there's no way to take them back. Sixth key point. The 2026 midterms are suddenly looking much more competitive than Republicans expected. After Trump won re-election, there was a sense that Republicans were in a strong position. They controlled the White House. They had a narrow Senate majority. They were optimistic about picking up House seats, but the shutdown changed everything. The off-year elections were a disaster for Republicans. Democrats won across the board, and now with Trump's approval tanking and his Senate coalition fracturing, the path to maintaining control of Congress is getting much harder. Democrats need to pick up a handful of seats to take the House, and if current trends continue, they might be able to do it, which would mean 2 years of investigations and subpoenas and oversight hearings. 2 years of Democratic committee chairs hauling Trump administration officials before Congress to answer questions. 2 years of impeachment attempts with an actual majority willing to vote yes. Seventh key point. Trump's response to this crisis is going to be critical. He can either try to repair relationships, reach out to the senators who walked out, acknowledge their concerns, make them feel valued again, or he can do what he usually does, attack them, call them traitors, say they're part of the swamp, try to primary them, threaten retribution. If he chooses the attack route, he's going to make things worse. He's going to drive more senators into opposition. He's going to accelerate the collapse of his coalition. But if he tries the reconciliation route, can he actually pull it off? Can a man who has spent his entire career attacking anyone who crosses him suddenly become someone who builds bridges and heals wounds? That seems unlikely, which means we're probably heading for more conflict, more drama, more chaos. So, where does this all end up? What's the likely trajectory from here? Honestly, it's hard to say for certain, but the trends are not good for Trump. His approval is declining, his party is fracturing, his agenda is stalled, his legal problems are multiplying, and now the people who are supposed to be his allies in the Senate are staging walkouts and expressing open frustration with his leadership. That's not a recipe for success. That's not a recipe for getting things done. That's a recipe for a presidency that spends its remaining time playing defense and managing crises rather than advancing priorities. The walkout on Monday was a symptom of a much deeper problem. Trump has governed through chaos and confrontation since day one of his second term. He's picked fights with everyone, Democrats, judges, prosecutors, the media, even members of his own party. He's treated relationships as transactional and disposable. He's burned bridges constantly with the assumption that he'd never need them again. But here's the thing about burning bridges. Eventually you run out of bridges. Eventually you find yourself on an island with no way to get back to the mainland. And that's where Trump seems to be heading. The senators who walked out aren't coming back easily. The trust that was broken isn't going to be rebuilt quickly. The political damage from the shutdown and the Epstein files and the prosecutions, that damage compounds over time. It doesn't just go away. And every week brings new problems, new crises, new reasons for people to distance themselves from this president. This is what collapse looks like. Not a sudden crash, but a slow erosion. A gradual loss of support, allies peeling away one by one. Problems piling up faster than they can be solved. And a president who seems unable or unwilling to change course. Who keeps doing the same things that got him into trouble in the first place. Who keeps alienating people and creating enemies and burning through whatever goodwill he has left. Keep watching this story. Keep paying attention to the Senate, because what happens there in the coming weeks and months is going to determine whether Trump can salvage his presidency or whether the collapse we saw on Monday is just the beginning of something much bigger. The cracks are showing, the foundation is shaking, and the question now is whether anything can hold it together. I'll see you in the next one.